I am delighted to introduce Rich Corriea. This is a great honor. Richard Corriea is a former San Francisco Police Department commander. He headed up the department's Metro Division, where his span of responsibilities included 5 district stations and over 600 sworn personnel. In his 35 years of policing, Rich has a wide variety of roles, including commanding the Police Academy and security operations at San Francisco International Airport. On his own, he went out and got a law degree. He's a member of the bar, and he has a master's degree in business. By the way, with regard to his time at the San Francisco airport, when he was there, not one airplane was stolen. Rich is a volunteer long-term care ombudsman. It's a role in which he advocates for residents of nursing homes and assisted living facilities. He is currently a member of the board of directors of Sequoia Living, a nonprofit organization that has offered affordable senior housing to older adults in Northern California for 60 years. Now, all of this is terrific, but it misses the point. Oh, by the way, there are other things. He's a university professor, he's got accolades, he's got awards, but that's not it. What is missing here is who Rich Corriea is, and that is a man who cares about people. So, Commander, take it away, please, sir.
Good morning, Breakfast Clubbers. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Good. Thank you for that great introduction. You could have just said, I'm just a boy that can't say no. And that would have covered it. Before I jump into this topic, I just want to tell Patricia Fripp that it's impossible for me today to put my left hand in my pocket because I'm sitting down. She always chastises me when I'm speaking that I have a bad habit of doing that. Today's topic, aging purposefully, a strategic approach to growing older and planning for your desired future. Boy, that's a real eye catcher, isn't it? Antonio came up with the new age of aging, which I like much better. This title, though, is going to be a course at the Fromm Institute at USF in the spring, which I'm pretty excited about. It'll be a 9-session course. And I'm passionate about the topic, so I've been speaking on it in an abbreviated form in the last 6 months or so. Anyway, let me jump in. I've always enjoyed the company of older people and people older and wiser than myself. These days, finding wiser than me has been easy. It's finding older people that's becoming more every day. It's just an interesting perspective how life moves forward. And it's always been this way for me. In 1962, when I was 5, I was part of a lending program. It seems that every Friday night, I was lent to the Katz family down the street, who were a number of probably 70 to 85-year-old people that didn't have any children. They were brothers and sisters and brothers-in-law living together. There were 4 or 5 of them. And for some reason, I was selected to go have dinner with them every Friday night. And I can tell you that at first, I hated it. They couldn't hear me. They seemed to chew in strange ways, and they stared at me a lot. The reason I was there, I came to appreciate later, was that they wanted a youngster to be around them so they could be reminded and talk and hear what's going on. And so that was my Friday night for probably a couple of years.
That's great.
Yeah, the last, and it was quite an honor. They didn't want, I had 4 brothers and sisters, and none of them were ever invited down. So I was special, and I was almost the youngest. Anyway, the last one of them, Phil Katz, died at 97. He died in about 1987. He was a World War I Medal of Honor winner. Wow. And just a phenomenal narrative. So I guess since that time, I've loved being around people I look up to. people with wisdom, and people whose narrative and whose story is long. Long and interesting seem to go together when it comes to your story. Anyway, when Phil died, his daughter gave me the china that we dined on in the 60s. And so talk about a big keepsake that I'm sure my kids are just going to put in the debris box, but to me, it's special. Anyway, let me, I hate this non-interactive stuff. Can someone smile or nod their head once in a while and go, wow, yeah, perfect, exactly what I need. So to talk about a strategic approach to aging, I have to give you some context and answer the question, who am I to weigh in on this topic? What do I know? Well, most of you know, or you now know, that I was a cop for a long time. And in that time, I spent a lot of time either working in a special victims unit or dealing with special victims cases. Special victims are folks that are vulnerable because of for some demographic reason, either age or mental illness, that makes them more susceptible to victimization. I was so often disheartened by the reports of fraud and theft perpetrated against the elderly, and the abuse and neglect and bias and marginalization I saw of older people. As a police officer in a radio car, the loneliness and seeing how people's lives ended up was, the best I can say is, it grew in me over time, these visions. I think back on the things I saw and how people's lives ended up. Certainly not how I would want, or any of you would want to end up. Many of the things I saw never fit with my sense of humanity. Okay, I'm a storyteller, and I have several stories. My two favorite stories on the issue of planning strategically for aging to approach it differently than most folks do involves one, Ruby, and also Richard Huggins, an extreme case. I don't have time to do both, so right now I'm going to pick Richard Huggins. And if there's time at the end, I'll tell you a little bit about Ruby, who both of them are deceased now and lived into their 80s. Richard Huggins was a suicide I attended. I think some of you I've told this story to. I'll just say here that I was nearly a witness to it. I heard the shot, and he was right outside my office. He left a note, and in his note he said, "I'm fortunate to have," this is a quote, "I'm fortunate to have lived well, and with the exception of being 80, I'm physically and mentally fit, but I know what's inevitable, cane, walker, chair, bed, and worse." So I researched his life after I retired quite a bit, visited and ended up visiting his grave in the National Cemetery in Dixon. And I've come to believe that he was indeed alone. He was the last of his family, but he was an otherwise able, volitional, and capable person, just alone. And that was overwhelming for him. In 2019, 47,000 Americans committed suicide. 37% of them were older than 55 years old. Anyway, shortly after I retired in 2014, I became a certified long-term care ombudsman. I have to tell you that in this role, I never expected it to have this impact on me. I just always wanted to be an ombudsman. I thought it was and I'll get to what it is in a second, but it took me on an educational and experiential odyssey of a magnitude that I hadn't anticipated, and one of the most personally rewarding endeavors of my adult life. So what's a long-term care ombudsman? Rich said it. My wife can't even pronounce it. She calls me an ombudsman. Anyway, ombudsmen, depending on the county, are either volunteered or paid. In San Francisco, we're volunteers, and we're statutorily mandated advocates for residents of nursing homes, board and care homes, and assisted living facilities. In the simple sense, we help people. For example, one of the earliest folks I encountered was an elderly man, and I advocated for him to get 2 fingers of scotch in what was the last week of his life. You wouldn't believe the difficulty in making that happen. We ended up with a beer. Anyway, I've fought to keep people housed, and I've helped them fend off thieving fiduciaries. And many of these for-profit facilities where people end up, the ombudsman get involved oftentimes in overbilling and charges that they level against financial charges and billing questions. Anyway, it's been interesting, delightful, and troubling. So I've learned a great deal about the provisions. I've also learned a great deal about the provisions in our culture for elder care, and have discerned some common patterns about how folks arrive in long-term care. So often a fall or a lingering illness results in a stay in an acute care hospital. These are most of the cases. And upon release, a person is not well enough to return home to independent living. And this can result in a brief stay in a skilled nursing facility that is covered by Medicare for a short period of time. And after that, it's a hurried, sometimes unsettling transition to long-term care for some. They're not going home, they're going somewhere, and Medicare isn't paying anymore. So I started to consider the folks that I was encountering had all moved all through this, and they were at a point in their life where it was difficult to make change. So I started to consider the question of how older folks could alter this pattern. Here's some, and I'm going to give you some takeaways, and I'm going to end up with the best things I can say about what I've learned. And first, let me say that old isn't sick. It just means we may need a little help from time to time. And second, at the time of a fall or an illness or a loss, your options can be incredibly limited. I often equate this point of transition as you become a hot potato. You can't stay at the hospital, and you aren't funded in this private facility. They send you back to the hospital, and the hospital's just looking for you for somewhere to go. None of us want to end up as a hot potato. So if one so often ends up in an unacceptable or unwanted future, the question is, how do you create preferred futures? I approach this question from a futurist and a strategic planning perspective. And I know that might sound heady, but it's pretty simple. And any of you can do this. What I want you to do later in your quiet time is make a list paper and put 4 words at the top. And if you forget them, just Google strategic planning. And if you forget strategic planning, just call me. Put strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats at the top. And nest under there in the context of aging and yourself, your attributes that fit this different area, these different areas. A weakness could be stairs going up to your front door, or propensity for a certain type of illness. Opportunities could be a close nearby relative who's always willing to help. Anyway, and strategic planning is just a visioning process. The essential point is to age well by purposefully designing a future full of preferred options accompanied by methods of implementing one's choices. I can't drive this point home any. I just have to say it with, I don't know, how do you say it with emphasis? Twice? I don't know. Pick the right people now. If I'm a lawyer, and nothing I'm going to talk to you about today is going to be legal stuff, except this one point. Get a power of attorney. And when you select your attorney in fact or your representative in any of your estate planning documents, pick the right person. Do not pick someone because you don't want to hurt their feelings. Don't pick 2 people because you don't want to show favoritism. Pick the right person. That is so key, because if you don't, a lot of your plans are not going to be able to come to fruition, and you're going to the chance of complexity later if you have the wrong person in the role. And I don't mean just someone will not manage your healthcare or your assets well. They won't be available. They won't be organized. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a relative. And don't settle for expectations. Be clear with the people in your life that you expect are going to help you one day. And when I mean help, it's not just powers of attorney and things like that. It's the one that's going to drive you to the store. Are they going to be there? Another thing about powers of attorney, they're powerful documents. So what I do is I have mine, I have several of them, and they're in my desk drawer, and everybody knows where they are. I don't hand them out in advance, but they're there if I were to need them or they were to need them to act in my stead. So remember, pick the right people. The strategic approach really brings focus to the risks some may wish to mitigate now before they happen. So the folks I work with, I can't overstate the importance of designing a desired future and the need to be sure that there's a context in place to support those choices. My cousin said I think she said she just sold a condo for someone who's moving into the Carlisle. That sounds to me like a wanted transition and someone who's managed it well. The alternative is, we can imagine what the alternatives are. So for much of life, we exercise a good deal of control over our activities, our choices, our direction. And life unfolds, and most of the time we manage just well, just fine. And at any age, transition and the need for change can arrive suddenly in the form of an illness or an injury. As time passes, we notice the challenges and let me slow down a bit here. At any age, something can happen that in the form of an illness or injury or loss. But most of the time, life just unfolds just fine, really most of the time. But as time passes, we notice challenges and setbacks our peers face. But I don't think we appreciate the implications of those challenges and setbacks for our own lives. How many of you said, well, that'll never be me? Or watching the person trying to cross the street with a walker on a fast signal, thinking, oh my God, that wouldn't be me. Well, I'm going to suggest that there's an opportunity when we see these situations and see our friends and their setbacks to really consider and act on the implications for your own life. It's so critical to anticipate and to manage and overcome the risks to the future that you want. But many of us will miss the opportunity. We just will. So let me suggest to you that we become so accustomed to being the locus of control, being in charge of our own lives. We decide where we're going to live, what we do, and when we do it, with whom we socialize and hang out. Imagine what time you're going to have breakfast or whether you're going to have a cup of coffee or not. There are countless activities of daily life that we choose, and we can become, and in my experience, I've seen people become very desensitized to the growing risk to that autonomy. And I'll get to why that is important in a little bit. There's a subtle assumption that's at work that we have to surrender some of the autonomy that we took for granted in our earlier years. I'm going to suggest to you this assumption is false. We can create a future we want if we do it now, at the time when options abound. And I see I'm at, I have 7 more minutes left. Is that right? Someone keeping track? Rich?
You're fine on time, Richard.
Okay, thanks. So we have to, before we can get into strategic planning, you got to be aware of the risk of complacency, and that you have to be sensitive to that. We're going to be complacent about the risks to our autonomy and our ability to live the life we want. Focus on that and what will arise out of it. If you're sensitive to the risk of complacency, you'll be able to move into implementing a strategic planning approach to your future. Something I don't, to me, it's a big deal, but we all have choices, right? Choices every day, a whole bunch of choices. They naturally evaporate. They do. With each passing day and month, one thing that we always thought of as an option we could do isn't going to be there anymore. And so unless we do something to see that we can extend it or create a context for it to remain, but choices become more limited. I was offered several years ago to be able to rappel down the side of a hotel downtown. Boy, I said maybe I'd do it sometime later, but not that day. Well, that choice has evaporated because I'm not sliding down any walls now, but so many of our options evaporated. We don't notice that they're gone. I'm going to suggest to you also it's important to not believe the stereotypes that are out there and we do. These generalizations about being older, that you can't remember things, that you can't see or hear well, that you must be physically frail or weak, or you're stubborn, inflexible, set in your ways, can't learn new things, can't operate a computer, must be interested in retiring or settling down or being, more sedentary, must not be capable of using, well, a computer, I already said it, that you're vulnerable. These are all generalizations that I think we come to believe about ourselves. And I see that people and the folks I've worked with, that they do believe these things. And I'm suggesting that we don't have to believe them. I have one thing I want you to think about. When you go into a store and there's an elderly person in a line level position, since I can't really ask questions of you all, I guess, think about what it is, your perceptions of that person. Is it, oh, isn't that great? A nice older person out, doing something kind of interesting, during the day. I'm going to suggest that most people think, boy, there's a person whose pension ran out or whose partner died, or whatever, and they're forced to go back into work. These biases and these assumptions about growing older, we believe them and we have to stop believing them. So I've seen time and time again the effects of these hurried, unplanned transitions, and it can be devastating. So as I move into the last 5 minutes here, here's the best I have to offer you today. When you see changes in your friends or anyone else's quality of life, take note. It's a mistake to think the same thing is not in your future or my future. Hope you don't find me preachy here, but I've just been around hundreds of people, and these themes arose out of just being in their company. Don't miss the signs. Prepare now to manage the many foreseeable events that later life brings, and to advance alternative ways about thinking about aging. Getting a bit of help. I don't know what it is for most folks, but I think many people have a real difficult time asking for help. But we're going to need it. Many of us, not all of us, but many of us. So getting a bit of in-home help, and I say in-home, it might be a handyman or something else that we aren't able to do anymore. To get in-home help while still living independently can reduce the risk of illness and injury, and thus avoid the trip to the hospital. If you have someone who buys groceries for you, or someone that tidies up the house for you, someone that changes a light bulb so you don't fall off a ladder, all of these things, you can reduce your risk of illness or injury by having a little help as you need it. In most cases, people get, the thought of getting help is too late. And so it's, I just can't say how important it is in a timely manner. And I don't think it's a surrender of autonomy to get a little help. It actually allows you to be more autonomous. You have to consider if your home will accommodate your needs as you age. You'd be surprised how many people end up in institutional settings, not because of their physical health, but because their homes can't accommodate their physical disability. The walls aren't, a wheelchair can't move through a house well. The bathroom isn't designed for a wheelchair. And so people can't go home. I've seen some really tragic cases of folks with stairs. And as a matter of fact, I work with a woman. Actually, I just send her clients because I think she does a great job. And she's meeting someone today who is, using a walker more and more. And she's going to his house and we'll do an assessment of what he needs to change. In this case, I think she's gonna tell me he has to move. He has stairs and a 3-story Victorian. But he is approaching this problem strategically, not waiting till it manifests. The safety net for seniors is much more limited than I had ever thought. It's mostly the very wealthy or very poor that have options. Long-term care insurance can give folks more options, but the underwriting is very tight there. So it's hard to get. It's hard to very expensive as if you're older. So just remember that safety net that you think might be out there just isn't, really isn't. So I'm going to say an incremental approach is important to assistance. I think I've already said that, but you can move very quickly from independence to an institutional setting unless you incrementalize the help you need to bring it on as you need it. And the resulting loss of autonomy and control over the events of one's lives is devastating. So many people are depressed. And you get to the point, if you haven't laid in the context, that you can't vet anymore properly. You're worried about bringing people in your home, your relatives are. It's something you have to do earlier rather than later. And so I'm going to, 2 more comments. Finally, I think it's well known that your personal health and longevity have a lot to do with your social contacts. And within your network of social contacts, you have to have 2 kinds of people. You have to have the people you can call up in an emergency. That's the guy like me. You call me up and say, hey, I got to go to the hospital. Can you drive me? I'm there night or day, right? Call me up and tell me you need a washer for your garden hose, and it might take you weeks to get it. So you need 2 types of people. You need the urgent people that will help you with the urgent situations in life, but you need the people that can help you with the mundane puzzles that life presents. People that help you. And I really search yourself and see if you have those people. And so I'm going to end on this, is that why most of us don't act. And it might be a bit of a reach. This could engender some questions, but ageism is epidemic in this country. And in fact, I've read some interesting articles that suggest that elderly folks themselves can be deeply ageist after having internalized a lifetime of negative stereotypes about aging. So we have fear of death, fear of disability, fear of dependence, are thought to be major causes of ageism. We avoid and reject older people as a coping mechanism that allows us to avoid thinking about our own mortality. We kid about our own mortality. I'm just going to suggest to you that that the very things that we fear, disability, dependence, loss of autonomy, we can control for those. We can plan a future that is the one we want. And if we do nothing, then you're going to end up with a future that someone else is going to ordain for you. Okay, that's my presentation. Any questions?
Rich, that was great.
Was it?
Yeah, no, it was awesome.
Rich.
And I took a ton of notes, by the way. So quick question for you. You had mentioned 4 points, and I kind of missed all of them. You were talking about your preferred future versus your unwanted future. You mentioned strengths, opportunities, but what were the other 2 points?
Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats.
Oh, okay. All right.
And then there's an overlay. There's a futurist perspective, and that's Tony just puts up SWOT analysis. Some people say strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and challenges. I don't like that. But a futurist's perspective is someone who looks at the world and says, what do I want my future to look like? What is my preferred future? And then works towards that. Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Richard, I have a question, if I might. Richard, thank you for an excellent presentation. You've given us a lot to think about here as we reach the sunset years. I guess like the 3 keys to real estate are location, location, location. The 3 keys to life seem to be timing, timing, and timing. I've seen in many cases where people anticipate their needs going forward and make that transition while they can still with it enough to be a party to the transition. And I've seen the other ones where people wait until they're drooling in the mashed potatoes before they end up moving. So I think it's so important to stress the fact that you have to consider your limitations and be realistic about them and try and engage that next step while you still can appreciate what's going on around you rather than having it all shoved down your throat and you're in a corner somewhere.
Yeah, and the sooner the better to say, how do I want my life to be in 10 years or 5 years or whatever. I've just seen tragedy after tragedy of people that have missed the opportunity to do it, and it becomes too late at some point.
Yeah.
Hi. All right.
Hey, Rich, it's Betty.
Hey, Betty.
What a wonderful presentation. My background as the family nurse practitioner, I've always been involved with the elderly, and I actually wrote a chapter in a book, the chapter was Care of the Eye for Elders and so forth. But we use it not just when we're older and helping people who are older, but in real estate now, I use it all the time working with elderly people in many different capacities, but even somebody in their 50s, what kind of a home do you want to move into? And I always call it a level in. And in San Francisco, it's very difficult. Or somebody that has disabilities. It's really challenging in the city. And you have to think ahead when you're 60 or 70 buying something or moving into a new, do you need an elevator building and so forth. So it's constant. I applaud what you do with the elderly. I did not have any idea you did all this as an Ombudsman. And I just thank you. And I'm sure you are so well received. And I just wanted to say thank you. Great presentation and great to bring this up for everybody.
Thank you. I haven't monetized this, nor do I intend to. Someone said to me recently, a fellow down south who friends after a while. That's not supposed to happen. And Maria says, I got a lot of loss of friends coming up. So how do I cope with that? I'm not sure. But a fellow said to me, I ask too much of you. And I said, really? I said, I get something out of this. This is not a one-way street. It is so fulfilling to work and help people. It really is. And that is, I think all of us have that in us. It's so I've said, you're not just taking from me, you're giving all the time. I met a woman recently who I couldn't stand immediately. She was really tough. It took about 3 hours over 4 sessions for her to begin to, do anything but like allow me to sit down when I was talking to her. And anyway, it's too late for me to ramble on about stories. Thanks, Betty.
But your stories are important, so I want to hear them sometime. The other thing is that when people complain about not remembering, I always like to call it a junior moment or a mental cul-de-sac. I can't remember. And that's important. And being positive about what we can do, not what we can't do. So that's all.
Richard,
Yes.
You are probably in the top 5 nicest people I've ever met. And congratulations on the wonderful introduction you received. That was superb. And I did know that you did this work from your last presentation. My question is, I have no family here. I have no children. I have a younger friend who, of course, now is 60. That isn't really that young, seeing I intend to live to 210. Oh, sorry, 110. Who knows, with medical science, it might be 200. So, of course, that's why I like my friends like Roanne to be very healthy, because I want lots of pals to hang out when I'm 100. I know there are professional executors, because although my 60-year-old friend said, "Oh, I'll look after your trust, etc., I'll represent you," but I think it's knowing what Roanne did. It's so much work. I'd rather have someone professional that's their ex. Do you have any experience of that, and how to find one?
Sure. Let me suggest this, though, is that every trustee and executor hires a lawyer. So your personal representative, I think, should be someone that you trust.
Yes.
It's someone who you really trust, a trustworthy person. I'm not convinced, unless you have a giant estate, that you need a professional fiduciary, because it can get very expensive and begin to water down your estate. So if you have a person, and what you can also do is build into your documents a successor trustee, a younger person, another person who steps in if the first person can't act. But I hear what you're saying, but they're going to have to hire a lawyer anyway, which is going to be one expense of administration. And if you pick a trustworthy, thoughtful, prudent person, they're going to pick a good lawyer, and that's all you need. If you have hotels all over the world you own, well, yeah, then you should use First Republic Bank's trust department. How's that for something like that? That's just my personal hit.
Yeah.
Okay.
I have a question. Are there places where you have you can get a standard power of attorney?
Yes. You don't need a lawyer to have a power of attorney. You can Google California statutory short form power of attorney, and it's a document that the legislature, the lawyers that work for them, drafted, and it's the standard power of attorney that is incredibly easy to fill out. And you can you don't need a lawyer. I give them to people all the time to use. And there's also a statutory power of attorney for healthcare. So both those documents are there.
And in my CPA experience, and I do a lot of estate planning, there was two things that I always brought up: is the people that we were trying to make the gifts and stuff. They weren't worried about dying. They were more worried about running out of money before they died. That was a big issue for us. And also, I've always told people that you can't dictate from the grave. So if you want to do certain things or get rid of certain things, you better do it in writing right up front, because I've seen more fights with siblings over silverware sets than I did over a $10 million portfolio.
I probated estates, and I learned early on that you don't know a family until you see them in a probate context. But, the legal stuff, that'll all take care of itself. The question in life is, how do you get your dog to the veterinarian? How do you get groceries in your house so that you can have the proper level of nourishment? How do you, your doctor, because you've had the same doctor for 40 years, just drop dead, how do you find a new doctor? And so all those things require this sort of earlier planning, sort of a succession planning of who are the people that are going to help you. I love this topic because it ends up with people having the lives that they want. And my experience in the last 4 years has been largely people that are not living the life that they want to live. They're eating food they don't like, and they're around people they don't like. They squabble, and then they become very solitary. don't connect with people. And this course, I'll send in the thing on the course. Anybody wants to attend it from. I don't know how I'll turn this into 9 2-hour sessions, but I'll find a way. I'll maybe bring in some speakers. But I'll send the link to the course when it comes out.
And talk slowly.
Patricia?
No, how you do it is you introduce a subject just like now, and you open it up to the audience and you share your experience, and you have so many wonderful stories that represent each point. You don't have to fill the 2 hours. You have the audience help you, and that will give you ideas based on the questions you have on how to structure the second time you deliver the course. And you can say to your students, now next week the subject is this. You have 2 days to email me specific questions you want answered.
Yeah, actually this presentation is sort of the high points of what this course will be. Each one of these areas will turn into, that I've covered, will turn into a session in the class. Anyway, I pitched the class and they bought it, so I got to get ready. It's nice to see you guys.
Well, happy to help you.
Yeah.
Rich, I've got a
What's
question.
There's lots of hands up too, by the way. Suzanne and Bert.
Rich, very important, your comment about long-term care is being a shield, and also having a plan B. A month ago, we just got a letter from CalPERS, which is the retire and you have a long-term care plan, but unlike the other CalPERS, you have to pay for it. We've been paying for it for over 20 years. CalPERS just announced that they're doubling the monthly rate. And they said, and next year we'll probably charge another 20%. We have been planning for 20 years to be able to rely on long-term care, as an issue with it. They give the opportunity to pay you back what you paid over the years, but that's not obviously the same thing as it gets more expensive. So we all need to have plan Bs on whatever our plans have, not just have a plan, but to have a wide range based on probability and possibility to work on for that time. That's the point of it.
Right, to anticipate, to look at what your risks are, to analyze, the risks. And there's a lot of risk out there, but you just have to manage the ones that are going to prevent you from living the life that you want. An insurance risk, I don't know how you mitigate that. That's a tough one, Bert. It makes all the difference with people in assisted living. And a lot of folks in assisted living, that the fretting over when they're going to run out of money. I would do burn rate analysis for folks. And even when they had plenty of money to live to be 110, they never stopped worrying about running out of money.
Mm-hmm.
Susan Rowan had a question.
Well, I was an executor. I still am for my late neighbor. When I took her to Marin General and they took her up for tests, Ann Mahoney called me and said, Susan, we're single. I have long-term care. What is your plan? And I actually thought about it a long time, because I don't have long-term care. And I said, I plan on being a burden on other people's children. So that's my plan. But it's also, you have to keep your health together. You have to keep your money together. And I see, Antonio, I love you because you laugh at everything I say. But I think what you said is so important. But what I really want to say, Rich, you said something that really struck my heart. We must have friends of all ages. If all of our friends look like us, believe what we do, are our age, we are missing out. Yesterday, my dear friend's granddaughter came to help me dismantle my house for the carpet and sat here and taught me 2 things on Zoom and on my phone that I would never know. I mean, of course, a 4-year-old could have done that for me too, but I didn't know one. So I think of what you just said, wide range of friends. And I always had older friends, and now I'm going to be one of the elders. So now people, by the way, when your hair is white, they think you're wise.
They do. Susan, let me suggest to you that in your strategic plan for aging, you should identify those children of your friends who are you're going to be a burden on, and then identify the children of the children that you're going to be a burden on as a hedge against one of those children not being there. My point is that you mitigate the risk now, and then you can have the life you want. Otherwise,
That is a great idea.
I'm being a little facetious, but to the point of what does it mean to be, planning for a desired future. So.
Patricia and I always had this plan about being nice to young friends because so they could drive us around when we're in our 90s.
Well, yeah. And I have to tell you, I'm new to this stuff. It's a lifetime of experience that I realize the experiences fit together, but it's really in the last 4 years of really spending time with people that are at the point in life that I'm talking about managing before we get there, and seeing tragedy after tragedy. Wealthy people, a wealthy person living alone who cannot get medical care. They can't line up the insurance. They can't line up any of that stuff anymore. And they don't trust anybody enough to help them. All that could have been avoided. All right.
Rich, we have Tricia Mangabot has her hand up, and then also Anastasia. So Tricia, why don't you go first?
Thanks. First, great job, Rich, and good to see you. I don't often talk during Zoom or even during our meeting, but I thought this was a great opportunity to speak up, only because, well, I just want to make a comment that resonates to what you said and help emphasize on the importance of your class. And before I say this, one of the things you may not know about me is that I volunteer and sit on a board of a nonprofit called Meals on Wheels for a few years now. So I do care a whole lot about our aging communities, so they stay independent. So as a banker, who works with different ages, millennials all the way to our aging adults, we're trained to watch for elderly abuse. And as much as I want to say it's a myth, I've seen elderly abuse with my own eyes, and it's sad when it's a family member. And like you said, Rich, it's important to have proper resources and tools in place. And what I got out of it, I think I put in 5 bullet points. The power of attorney, it should be assigned to someone you trust, and that should be emphasized. The trust agreement directing where your assets should go, trustees or successor trustees who will be assigned in your behalf. Like you said, banks and lawyers, in case you don't trust your family member, if you need a trust officer, let me know. The insurance and estate planners have that, or planning should be in place. Mundane tasks that can be directed, and that could be directed by a trust, and that's what I've seen. And then lastly, I just want to say that I know this wasn't said, but nonprofits like Meals on Wheels that can help. Let me know as well if you'd like to get a nonprofit, the assistance of Meals on Wheels. I know the executive director, and I can add you to the list.
Mm-hmm. Oh, thanks. I've seen that work really well. That's my Ruby story, that when I see you all one day in person, I'll tell you, but Meals on Wheels kept her eating for a long time. I want to choose what I have for dinner and when I want to have it. And I want to choose what time I go to bed and what time I get up, and a few other things. And I can plan for those things now. If you don't plan, forget the big things in life. It's the little things that you lose control over. I want to be able to go, where I want to go when I want to go. And assisted living, I have to tell you, is not a panacea. It's expensive, and that's a whole complete topic in and of itself. I'll say this much, is that I've seen more people that live in fear of their caretakers. They're unhappy with the way they're being treated, but they're loath to raise an objection for fear that it'll get worse. And that is really common in assisted living, even when they're paying $10,000 to $15,000 a month to live in a place. So those are the things we want to avoid.
Well, it's 8:53 right now. We have time for two more questions. So Anastasia, why don't you go first, and then Laura O'Malley can offer the final question.
Thank you, Rich. That was awesome. As a person who's been an advocate for my mother who passed in March, and she was in assisted living. We moved her in there for the last year and a half of her life. My siblings and I have been very aware of how blessed she was because we as siblings took such great care of her. And she's never been hospitalized alone. In fact, I have my journal that I take with me every doctor appointment. I'm her medical advocate. I sit there at her bedside and I talk to the doctors. And it breaks my heart. It breaks my heart to think about people who don't have that. And they don't always have the money, and they don't have connections. They don't have friends. One of my mom's closest friends died in a rehab home by himself. I mean, we kids would visit. We had no relation to him, but he had no one else in his entire life that was anywhere near him. And they need the medical advocacy too. So this being able to communicate directly with the doctors, the nurses as they're coming in, to question them on things. Like, I stopped them a lot of times from doing certain things because mom's got her hearing aids out. She can't hear. She's sick. She can't communicate. She doesn't understand. She gets overwhelmed. And people lose their own ability to advocate for themselves. Now, I don't know what the solution is, like how we can possibly find enough volunteers in the world to be an advocate for a particular person. But part of me wants to ask you as the lawyer, like, what happens with us? This is our mom. This is, family. What if I wanted to support someone, a friend of mom's who is in the same situation, or a friend of a friend, and I'm their medical advocate and I'm going to those appointments and I'm helping them, but am I at risk if I guide them or try to clarify these medical decisions that they need to make? Would their kids then come back and sue me and say, you guided our mother to make the wrong decision, she's dead now, we're going to make you pay? Like, I don't know. I hate to even think those things, but this is the world that we live in. And I just wonder what kind of liability there is for people who want to step up and be that advocate that I wish to God every single person had, because it's heartbreaking to be in spaces where people are completely alone. And I saw so much of that. Right. So I'd be curious what your thoughts are.
Well, the need for an advocate, I think a medical advocate, is at any age. When I was a kid, my mom would go to the doctor with me because if I had a choice between getting a shot or not, the answer would be no. The point is that we are not good at being objective about ourselves. It becomes subjective very quickly. So to have someone independent and objective in the room is a blessing. On the issue of liability, there's liability everywhere, but for reasons, the law can be kind of creepy sometimes. But the truth is that if you have a power of attorney for healthcare, you're not going to be able to, I almost can't imagine a situation where the individual's doctor does something untoward that you're ultimately liable for. I just don't see that. I also see that, the doctors and actually these facilities, the ultimate solution for them often is people dying. As the complexity grows and people grow older, they die. I almost think the system is a little designed for that outcome. Also, our exposure to liability for harm to people, it depends on the time of life they're in and such. I would say that would be maybe one of the least of my worries, is the exposure that way, because you're always going to also have a third person in the room with you.
Right, and the medical people who they're ultimately the ones that are doing it, but I never even thought about that until today, and the fact that you're a lawyer and you do this type of work, but I would encourage anyone here who can be an advocate for someone to do it, because it just makes all the difference in the world, and to keep track of everything, throughout their medical situation. So just having that support is valuable.
Let me leave you with this, that the power of attorneys for healthcare require witness signatures, I believe, and maybe even notarized. And that shows that the transfer of authority is volitional and the person's able to do it. And normally they're in life, the person is in charge of their own healthcare. They make their own decisions. And if they become in dire straits, or at the word eludes me right now, but then the authority transfers to if they become incapacitated, the authority transfers to the power of attorney to act. Well, at that point, with the medical people, there aren't many mistakes, I think, that one could make that would result in some sort of civil liability. You just exercise good common sense. The person trusts you, they give you authority, and you don't really have the authority until they're incapacitated. All right.
All right, Rich, one last question from Laura.
Hi, everybody. I just wanted to mention an organization that's available in Marin and Sonoma counties that you guys might not know about. It's called the Ceres Project. It's CERES, the Goddess of Harvest. And if you know of anyone who's going through a medical condition and they need short-term organic meals delivered to their door for themselves and their caregiver, you can call them and get on the list to have some meals sent to you. I had a young friend of mine who was only 49 years old who ended up with colon cancer, and for a while ended up receiving meals from them, and then went back and became a driver for them later, a volunteer driver to drive meals around when he came around the bend. So it's a wonderful, wonderful organization that everybody should know about. And I wanted to thank you, Rich, for a really great cohesive speech. I mean, it was really wonderful. I have two quick questions, one a comment and one a question. So the one thing that I seem to be going through a lot now as I'm turning 65 is doing the Swedish death cleaning. To get through all of the things that I've acquired over the years. I wanted you to speak to that. I'm noticing this with my clients too as well. And then the other is, how do you pose to someone who's getting older that you're noticing things are changing for them? They're kind of unaware or in a state of denial. And how do you progress in helping them to kind of make arrangements for further down the road?
Laura, first of all, let me say, I was on Ancestry last night and I found out that your dad lived in the Richmond district at one point. And I was so delighted I always thought he was a Sunset District character. And we both know that the Richmond's better than the Sunset. So anyway, I looked at his World War II draft card and I said, yes, Richmond district. Anyway, so on the thing of clutter and stuff in your house, that's a real tough one. People's context in life are the bookends or the things they keep around. And I feel they're a little bit of the fat of the soul. How do you trim that out of there? Mm-hmm. I have to say my approaches with people I've helped through it, and I could use some help myself, has been really, ad hoc depending on the situation. I have a relative who lives a little north of here who has graduated from clutter to hoarding. Yeah. And I've told him that to go pick a type of floor he wants because I'm throwing everything out in his house. That's all there is to it. And fine, I'm doing it. Haven't done it yet. We'll see. I don't have a good answer for that. But it is part of what I'm talking about, is that if you want to, create a future that you're happy in, it may well be that you have to move to maybe a smaller house. My parents lived in a house, only half of which they used because they made a mistake. They shouldn't have bought a house as big as they did. Anyway, and also all the junk, your kids are just going to put it in the debris box anyway. So you could just put it off. Your strategy could be to put it off to them, or put it in storage and make them pay for it. And the second question I liked, what was it?
It was about when you notice changes in older friends of yours, how to delicately broach that. There's always this fine line of, I'm noticing things, maybe you should start preparing, and how do you bring that up?
I'll tell you the way first of all, there's a word, it's a long word I can't pronounce, but it is common for folks to get assistance and help after they need it. They're trying to hang on to their autonomy and freedom, even though they've put no context in place for that to happen. The first sign of the cobwebs on the ceiling, that they're not getting down anymore. And it goes from there. And so I learned through this Ombudsman program, I take a really resident-centered approach. I don't get into my thinking about what they need. I spend a lot of time listening to what they think they need. And out of that, we can have movement about, well, okay, you want this, here are the possibilities. But I can't decide what their needs are. They have to tell me. And so, what I'm saying, it's not always intuitive to say, when I call them resident, but, elder-centered. Focus on them. This fella down south wanted to move back to San Francisco. I thought it was a terrible idea, but the transition trauma, the hope that it'd be better in San Francisco, which was going to be unlikely. But my place was to focus on what he wanted and listen. And at the right time, when I'm asked, or certainly some things are so exigent that you don't have this luxury, but as long as you have it, focus on what they're saying and what they want and how they'd like their life to be. And then you can get into the reality of how it can be at that point.
Okay.
So what they have to say.
Thank you.
Sure. Nice to see you. Right?
Rich, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing with us. It's we're a few minutes after the hour, but I just want to thank everybody for coming to the club today, and thanks for sharing.
Let me. Can I say this? I was pinch hitting today because I had lined up the DA, and my thumb hit the wrong number, so I scheduled him for the wrong date. Could have been a crisis for your friend Janice, who sets these up, but I had the answer. The answer was, I'll come and do this instead of him. And I think he's scheduled for in November now.
So good. The DA can wait. We're more important. Hey, by the way, next week we have Andy Lapata that's going to be speaking, which is a nice follow-up to you, Rich. He's going to be talking about seeking support and why it's your greatest strength, and just asking. So that's the title of his presentation. So again, thanks everyone for joining. I'm going to stop the recording right now, and you all have a great rest of the day. I'll keep the room open for a few minutes if anyone is interested in talking further.
Have a great week, everybody.